Okay, I think we're good now. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to break this into thirds. So first, what we're going to do is just play with Dark a little bit on its own to get the overview of the primary concepts. Then I will show a basic HTML web form. And the reason I'm going to show that is just because Dark is completely front-end agnostic. And so sometimes it's a little bit easier to debug and make sure you know what's going on when you're starting from something really simple. And then I will show React SPA. And after that, if people want to get into any more in-depth topics, I'm happy to talk about testing or error handling or a re-release of feature flags or anything else that might be coming up throughout the process. But our primary focus will be on talking about how to work with Dark with your front end. So I'm going to share my screen now. You've probably seen this before, but this is the basics of what Dark looks like. When you open the browser, it's all on the canvas, and on the left-hand side, you have all of the major structural components that you're able to create. You can see right now this one's empty. We don't have anything. The bare basics, if you want to make a API endpoint, you can create a new API handler, specify the method, and specify whatever code that you want to have there. And we talk about deployless a lot with Dark. This is already up and hosted, and you can see the response. The reason this is important isn't necessarily just the deployless piece, although that's helpful. It's that when you are working in production, you're able to get all of your traces and work from real information. So you can see here, we now have these 5 white dots. The first one shows incomplete. It's just the one that starts as a sample. And then you can see we have 4 requests, all from less than a minute ago from when I opened the browser repeatedly. For those, it's not that interesting because we didn't pass in that much real information. We just kind of see the headers and some of the basic HTTP stuff. But if we were to say, change this to take more information, like you might think of if you're having profile pages, you would be able to pass in the profile username. We can see now that we can get this dynamically. And if we change this, we'll say hello to Victoria. I missed a space, but now when we have this trace, we can see when we hover over the trace dot that it pulls out the variable and shows us that this is Victoria. And so if we're trying to debug something with our application and we know that we had a specific trace that failed, we can go back through, figure out which one it is, and then walk through the code step by step. So here we can say that the output of our concatenation is hello Victoria. We can fix that, and now we see we actually have the space. One other thing that sometimes trips people up with these HTTP handlers is they have implicit returns. So right now, this endpoint is returning hello Victoria, as you saw, and we can't return anything else because we already sent that. And so if we want to be able to send something instead, what ends up happening is we add this let underscore on the left, and this is Dark's equivalent today of having a statement. So you can do something that doesn't necessarily have a return value. So you just use the expression for the side effect, or you can name it. And then you can choose to return something else. Now, if we get back over here, regardless of what we do, we'll just return the string name. We could just return the variable name instead, and that will return Victoria. That's obviously pretty simple. One of the big things that you want to do, and this kind of joins to come into play when you're building your front-end applications as well, is talking to external APIs. One of the nice things about this is you get these REPLs that allow you to test anything out within your code, and you can use them in substitute of having to have something like, say, Postman to test other external APIs. So let's do this here. If we make a post call, which is something you do pretty often to other APIs, but in this case, we're going to post into our Dark canvas, which is April10th@buildwithdark.com. Just call test. Don't need to post anything. And then when we run this, you saw above, we had the string concatenation function, but it didn't, this didn't necessarily, we didn't have to choose to play it because it's a function that doesn't have any side effects. Whereas here, since this is making an actual external call, we'll have to play this to be able to see the response. And then we see that we got a 404 back, which makes sense because we don't have this yet on our canvas. It appears in the 404 section and we're able to create it. I saw we had a question about feature flags, so let me go back quickly and show you that. So we can see here that we have this and it's live. It doesn't automatically go to a feature flag because a fair amount of the time when you're writing, even when you're using the traces, like this canvas, no one's actually using this in production. I don't mind if I'm just editing it live and being able to do things. But when I get to the point where I don't want to just be editing live and I want to make changes, we have the command palette, which allows for refactoring and also for doing things like adding a feature flag. So we can see here that I've now feature flagged, and I can write any when condition. So say, we'll just do it for Victoria. When the name is Victoria, we'll say, hi, instead. So now if we go back over here, if I go to hello, Ellen, I just get, oh, no, want to return the greeting. So when we go back over here, if I have hello, Ellen, I get hello, Ellen. But now when I change it to Victoria, I just get my very excited greeting for Victoria. And so the same logic holds for, it's obviously pretty simple since it's just a string. But once you have real traffic, you can decide what conditions you want to test under before releasing it to everyone. And I guess we can just be very friendly in this case. So now we can commit our feature flag, and now everyone's just going to get the greeting hi back, regardless of their name. I can show you a little bit more on that later too, but that's the general workflow of using the feature flags. So then, so then once we have an endpoint that is a post endpoint, the cool thing here is we can actually work with any data coming in. They didn't put any data in, so let's do that. Rerun it. We'll see instead of getting the 404, we get the 500 because we don't have any return here, but we now have this data. And so what we can do is we can work with it directly. We have request.body, and we can see that. So now if we call it, we'll get back the same body that we passed in. We could also do something like decide to set this into a data store. I can just make a unique key. And similarly, data stores just work out of the box. So we said it was test, right? Yep. And so this is where live values come in handy. It's easy to go back up and see what was I expecting my key to be. And this is a string. And so then we can call this data store, which I didn't name, so it's db blah, blah, blah. And like we said, HTTP client post, you can run the generate key expression, you can run the db set expression, you see the result that it put in, and now our data store is locked because it has real data. And so that's the general workflow for using Dark, regardless of if you're building a backend for an SPA or for something else. You're pretty much always creating one of these major backend components and then working with them to add expressions, fill in the arguments, and decide to run expressions that have side effects if you want to as you build. The next part of this is actually using this with static assets. So what I'm going to show you is, before we get into an actual API, this is a super simple HTML form that I thought would be good because it's actually useful to us in this class. So what it is I'll just open it for you. There you go. It's just a H1, and then it's make a suggestion for a future video, give us your Dark username, make a suggestion, hit the suggest button. But right now we can see this is just running locally on my computer. And so what we want to be able to do is have this hosted from Dark, so we don't have to go find another hosting provider, and we're actually able to serve a full application to our users. I wanted to pull this up since chances are when you're doing it yourself, you'll want to have these open side by side, but we have a set of documentation on hosting your static assets. And the big thing is that you do need to install a command line application to do this. We have 3 versions of it, one for Mac, one for Windows, one for Linux, and we give you the explanation for the permissioning if you need that. There is sometimes this thing on Mac, depending on what version you're running, where you have to like go through a bunch of steps. And then once you have this, you can just use it to upload any static files you want. And so in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to upload that demo file that I showed you. And it takes a build directory generally. Since I just have the one HTML file, I'm just going to upload the folder that has my one HTML file in it. And you can see that I was testing before, and I'm going to upload the demo file. You can see here, there's a little bit more documentation below. Probably you're all familiar with this. You can either use environment variables, or you can use an .rc file, or you can just, if you're doing it for the first time, you can just type your password in. I obviously do not want to show you all my Dark password on the video. So it pulls my credentials in, it attempts to upload the files, and then it says upload succeeded. If you're curious, again, what this actually looks like, I just have the Dark CLI apple already installed in my SRC folder, and so it's just using that. If you have any trouble while you're going through the process of getting this installed, that's definitely a fair thing to ask about in the community Slack. I've walked a few people through it on video chat. Sometimes you just make a mistake. I've had people walk me through it on video chat, even though I use it all the time. So when we head back to our dark canvas, we'll see now that we have a static asset here, and it has a reference, and it has been deployed. So if I open it, we can see now what we have is from within the CDN, we have our dark videos site, and we can make an endpoint where that actually works in dark. So there is an entire built-in library for static assets. And so the autocomplete, like you saw before, fills things in naturally. And within the static assets, there's a few different types. Probably the one that you will end up using the most often is serve latest. And this is saying if you have one front end and you're going to be uploading it over and over again, we actually have a dark user who built a hook to GitHub for this. So if you want to just have it deploy and upload a new version every time you ship to GitHub, you can do that. That's also in the documentation. Then you can just say what file you want to serve. In our case, it's an index.html. And so now what we'll have is we'll have our dark application, Ellen-April 10th, so that was our canvas, built-with-dark.com. And it's here and it's hosted, and we're able to use this to post things. An alternative we can use, this is probably the second most common of the static assets functionality. I don't know, I'll just call it base page, it doesn't really matter. We can use instead, we can decide to serve a specific file from the deploy hash. And you can see here we can copy the deploy hash, which makes it nice and easy. And then again, index.html. And so if you had multiple versions of a page, or you had multiple different types of assets you wanted to upload, say you had a couple images that you were serving, or say you had a couple, I've done it before actually. You probably noticed the REPLs are named adjective animal. When we originally built this, we'd uploaded two files, one that had a list of adjectives and one that had a list of animals. And so when we open this one, it'll be exactly the same since it's the same deploy, but this one would keep referring to that old set of assets. So very similarly to what we saw before when we were using just from within dark the REPL behavior, now that we have this, if we fill this in, I'm Ellen, and I think we should have a feature flags one since people ask about feature flags a lot. And I make this suggestion, same as when I was building with my REPL, I get a 404 back in the browser. And when I go to the 404 section, I can see that I have the suggest endpoint that hasn't been built. Let me try it somewhere else. And I can see this real data where I can see that I have this thing in it as a suggest. That's just me being lazy in my HTML, but I can see what the suggestion is and what the username is. So much like we did before with posting from our test endpoint into a data store, we could make another data store for suggestions, and it could have the username and it could have the suggestion. And what we can do when these come in is we can db set. Put this in username, request.body.username, and suggestion, request.body.suggestion. So you can see here, this is pretty common. You might not always want to be using all of the fields that came in with your body, or you might want to be using a subset of them for something else. Another one I do a lot is, say if I'd ask for email addresses instead of usernames, sometimes I'll then add people to a specific MailChimp tag, for instance. Yes, this is a great question. In dark, when we're talking about the static assets functionality, we are talking about pretty much anything that you would want to upload, and it is frequently a directory. So when we're saying static assets, this could mean your, and I'll show you this in a second, entire React front end. It could be a simple HTML form. It could be just like a list of data that you want to have into the system, but it's much more wide reaching than say just an image file or just a text file. We would like to make it so you could upload an asset using the UI. It's one of those things where there's a trade-off between the different things that you're able to build. Once you get the CLI working, I know it's a little bit more intimidating than some other technologies are. I guess it just depends on how much of a CLI person you are. But yes, at some point you will be able to do that from the browser as well. I feel like there was another chat, but I lost my chat window. There we go. Yes, so the deploy hash is automatically generated as a unique identifier when you upload it. You can't necessarily define what this is. The folder you're uploading, you can define however you want, like mine was called demo. It's often called build. And as to editing them in the Dark editor, yes, eventually we would like to make it this easy to build front ends as well. One of the things I encourage you to do when you're starting with this is start from a basic HTML form, which is why I'm showing that in the demo. If you try to start from building out a full SPA first and you don't usually do that, I did this recently with Svelte, you can find yourself really in the weeds and you can be unclear on if your front end is actually calling your backend or not, or what is going on. And so if you really want to get the feel for building the backend in Dark, I would recommend starting with something where you know the front end is working 100% and then connecting it. And then if you want to go back and forth between, I can show you this at the end if you want, something more complex in Dark, you can. Yeah, it's really easy to get in the weeds on front end. I think I definitely identify more as a backend person now as a result. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to just use generate key again and then suggestions. And so now what's going to happen is that anytime anyone visits our page and makes a suggestion, it will show up. If you want to do it, you can. If you have ideas of more things you want to see, because I can use this one for real. And so then we'll end up with suggestions coming in. I can show you. Let's make another one. Feature flags, data store migrations, suggest. And so you can see, since we only have that one implicit return, it returned this. We can, instead of doing that, say, thanks for the suggestion. And you can see that since I've made the suggestion, this data store is now locked. And so now basically from end to end, it's really ugly, but we now have an application that allows users to visit a website, post some form data, and stores it in a data store that we can then use. So let's see, we can then make some other handlers for that, where if we can do get all suggestions, I guess, all suggestions. Then we can do get all suggestions, and then probably we don't want to reveal everyone's name, so we can just do, and now we have an endpoint where we see all suggestions. Ooh, that was a good bug. Where we have the request for data store migrations. We could also do a subset of these. So we have the suggest, we have all suggestions. We could do one that is suggestions count. These are terrible names. I do not recommend you do your API like this. Where now we'll have an API endpoint that tells us how many suggestions we have, which is 1. As you can see, it becomes pretty simple to build a basic CRUD application. Another thing we would like to do in the future is have it so you can have something that automatically generates all of the handlers you would need for a basic CRUD app. And yes, you can connect to any endpoint. This HTTPClient library that I showed before, I'm posting it within Dark just because I wanted to show you the 404s appearing because that's pretty cool. But if you want to do literally anything else, you can. There's some integrations that we have built in for you. So if you're integrating with Slack, we have a whole bunch of Slack API wrappers. If you want to subscribe people to a MailChimp, we have specifically the MailChimp subscribe wrapper. We have a bunch of, we have a package around Trello as well, but we're continuing to add to that too. We do not yet have a Stripe wrapper, but we've seen multiple people integrate with Stripe before. Okay, so I guess it'll help a little bit to do the overall story on the package manager. Right now, we're looking to release the package manager so anyone is able to add functions. So I can show you an example of a package today. Slack post message is a good one. So you can see here that to be able to post a message to Slack as a developer, all you need is the bot token. So the token you get from Slack, what channel you want to post to, and the text that you want to post. The way these get written is that right now this prefix dark is that the only people that access to this very first version of the package manager, because we wanted to make sure it was working, was people who work at Dark. But in the future, every developer who uses Dark will be able to create their own packages and share them back to the community. Today, if you want something added as a package, if you send us functions that are ready to go, we will upload them for you. And we also take requests. So Slack is just something that people are frequently requesting. And to David's question about auto deploying your SPA, yes, I didn't build this. It was built by a user, which was actually super cool. But if I go back to the docs, if I look at the static assets docs, Greg Brimble built this GitHub action that allows you to upload the static assets automatically. Cool. Okay, I think that covered everything. Let me just skim up quickly because I want to make sure I haven't missed anyone's questions. Great. Okay, so basically you've now seen the same thing twice, which is it's really easy to set up a few API endpoints, set them up with persistent storage, and have an application that works with that, either just as a backend talking to an external API or with a hosted front end. So I wanted to show you a slightly more complicated one to give you a feel, since this does change things a bit. So what I have here is this is an application. If you want to play with this one to get comfortable with using Dark to do a backend for an SPA, we open source this on our GitHub. So if you go to github/darklang, you can get it. It's called Dark Sign-In. But what it is it's also our demo video a lot of the time. It's an Office sign-in application that's a basic React application. So the thing I would really encourage you that's helpful is, regardless of what you're using for your SPA, if it's React, if it's Vue, if it's Svelte, you want to set a constant host. And you want to have this being the thing that's pointing at your Dark canvas, and then define all of the routes relative to that. So in this case, we're working on Ellen-April 10th. And so if I change this host here, this means that everything else will dynamically change to work with that. So Ellen-April 10th/hosts, for instance. The other thing that is something that you need to be aware of when working with React or with Vue, and this is in the docs, is that often they require a specific flag for your public URL build. In React, it is public URL, and in Vue, it is public path. In Svelte, I think you don't actually end up running into this. So this is just important to know that when you are running the build, you want to be setting this flag so it will work when you upload it. So let's see. And so I'm going to run the build in the directory that we have now that we've updated that URL. You can see this is like the longest part of the process by far, is waiting for React to build things. I could have run it locally, I just didn't. And then same as before, I'm always forgetting the flags. And so it takes a few flags. It takes the canvas, your username and your password. My username and my password are in that netrc file we talked about before. And then the directory I'm going to upload is the build directory. So it pulls my credentials. Obviously, this file is a lot larger than the last one, since instead of just being HTML, it's a full SPA. We're going to wait. And then it says upload succeeded. So now this is where things come in that is interesting. And this is where serve latest might not always be the thing you want. So now when I open serve latest, I'm going to get my React application instead of the form that we were using before. And so this is what I actually want. And so I'm going to rename this route to be suggestions. And then this one can be my base route. Same thing that we saw with the basic HTML form. When we opened this page, this has a dropdown. I can show it to you in the code. This is the host dropdown, which is it's trying to get the list of hosts. And so it does this as soon as it loads the basic page. I think I'll call it from here, and I'll calls it from here. And so then once I'm here and I get the 404 back, it's that same process of I can go and say, okay, I'm going to have a list of hosts. I wrote this up, or Alice wrote this application and I've used it, so I know that this is expecting a list of strings. You obviously can tell it to expect whatever format you want. But so when I make a list of strings, and you've probably seen this if you've seen the demo video, I now have this API endpoint that's here and it's working for me. One thing I will point out is that if you are doing this back and forth development, like this one's already finished, and so I wanted to upload it, you can just run it from localhost and point at the API host and you'll be totally fine. We have it set such that if you were in particular using localhost 3000, 5000, or 8000, it's much more permissive of CORS. You'll run into less browsers CORS issues. If you do want to upload it, particularly, or if you're using credentials, we also have documentation on how to handle CORS within Dark. This document is a lot of me reading MDN and helping to figure out what the best way to set up just the basics of the spec is in Dark. If you do end up with course problems, please let us know. This is something we're still working on. We're trying to set even more permissive settings for localhost to make it easier to get going. Yep, so if you're working with localhost, it should mostly just work. It has to be on 3000, 5000, or 8000. We're gonna switch that to be any localhost. But in the meantime, if you have the thing where you're running two separate things, make sure the one that you want to use with Dark is the one that's running on the base and not the one that's running on 3001 or whatever it is. There's a little bit more documentation on this here. And then, of course, if you worked with Course before, some handlers you can do it directly in the handler itself, and some handlers you have to have an options handler. Dark does support options handlers. And so just going back to the basic thing we were doing, I've already done so many times, I'm not going to do it again. But if I wanted to, I could have a data store of hosts associated with this. Might as well just do it. We can give hosts names, and we can give them phone numbers, and we can give them Slack IDs. And so that gives us a sense. And then instead of just saying hosts, we can do db all. And so now we have an application that'll dynamically generate the list of hosts for us. If you haven't worked in a functional language before, one thing to point out is that you'll see that I've been using list map a lot throughout this demo. And so the distinction is list map is a lot like a for each. And what it takes is it says for each thing in your list, what operation do you want to take? And so in this case, I'm saying for each thing in my list, I just want to get the names. Okay, and it's not very interesting because we don't have any hosts. So then we can use a REPL to add one. And this is, again, pretty common technique. Sometimes you'll have a REPL that you'll keep open, like for, say, adding a host, because you're going to want to add a new host every time you, say, hire someone, for instance. And sometimes you'll have a REPL that you'll just be checking something quickly. You'll want to look at the last item in a data store, and then you'll just get rid of it. I don't remember what that is off the top of my head. And host. So then once we have this host, I can also, if I want to rerun the whole thing at once, I can use these ones on the upper right. Then I can do this. We'll see I now have a host. We'll see that value, and we'll see value.name is Ellen. And so now when we go back to our app, it'll just have Ellen. So I'd say that pretty much covers all of the basics of using Dark with static assets. The key things being deciding whether or not you want to use the deploy hash or always be using the latest. If you want to always be using the latest, connecting to that GitHub action, and using the CLI in order to upload assets. I could keep building out the rest of this backend, but at this point, it's not really so much about the SPA aspect. It's just about the other pieces of Dark. If that's useful, I can show that. I can show cron and workers, but I'll pause now to see if there's more questions. You're welcome, and thank you. And let's sign in. Okay. So yes, if you wish to build login, you can build login yourself. Victoria, do you want to join this canvas so people can see what multiple people are like? You can build login yourself. Let me show you this one. This one's ugly, but it's one that we're working on. This is a side project my co-founder Paul and I work on in Svelte. And one thing we wanted to do was play with building it ourselves. And so you can see here that we are validating people's emails when they come in. And then there are password related functions, so you can hash passwords. These will not run as live values. And this is also something we want to do for secrets in the future. So you aren't able to see the passwords in this way. You only see the hash, and then it just shows you that it wasn't executed. And then similarly, you can test them and pass cookies back and forth once people log in. This is why I've been spending a lot of time thinking about course recently. Your other option is you can integrate into another provider to do OAuth, which we've also seen people do. And then, of course, external APIs often want to see the token exchange. I do have a video of setting up OAuth with Slack, although we also now have a OAuth Slack easy function, which is nice. There's also just before I show the collab thing, there is a fully written version of a sample login application that was written by a security engineer, Lizzie Dixon. So I would definitely trust the sample reference over the one that Ellen wrote. And so you can see here, this like goes through the entire process of building a login with cookies. Okay, going back to show Victoria being in my canvas. Okay, so you can see here that when you have multiple people in the same canvas, they appear in the upper right-hand corner. So this is Victoria who's in here right now. And then when they are on a specific handler, they also appear next to the handler that they are on. So like right now, Victoria would be seeing me on the suggestions handler. You can see here, Victoria's on the suggest handler. The collab is not quite real time. We haven't done the operational transform work behind that yet. So basically the best practice is don't work on the same handler as the other person at the same time. And production level canvases. Yes, they get messy. So the reason they are laid out like this is in the long run, what we want to be able to do, and you can start to see the pieces of this, we're like, yeah, this one's you can see here when I'm on the all suggestions handler, it brings up the data store that I'm working with and shows me the schema. And then the flip of that, when I'm on the suggestions handler, it shows me all three of the API endpoints that are calling that. And we want to expand this work in the future to be able to give you an overall view of how your entire architecture works rather than just a set of files like you saw earlier, clicking around trying to find like, is it in my index.js or which file is that actual loading logic in on the front end. The downside of this is right now, it definitely feels a little bit disorganized. We're looking to add the ability to group handlers together. My best recommendation for navigating larger canvases is either to use the sidebar, which works pretty effectively, or within the Omni box, if you start to search for anything, you can see it brings up everything that contains that word. And so this becomes a pretty good way to organize it. If you're more of a person who likes to organize things visually, I haven't actually released this yet, so you're getting a sneak preview. You can see that it's ugly right now. This is a sample of every single function in the dark language, so you can see what it's like with actual values and see the results. So like dict is empty makes, no, dict is empty shows that an empty dict is empty, or dict get something back out of the dict remove removes the fields. But so the way this one is organized is it is each type of prefix, like all the math functions, all the options and results functions, all the HTTP functions are in a column, and then it's just ordered top to bottom. And so like, it actually really bothers me that some of them are a couple pixels off. And so I think that's like, that is a disappointing thing. It would be really nice to be able to add the ability to snap to grid. We definitely, and we don't, so size-wise, we don't currently recommend that you build a canvas in dark that is more than say 50 to 100 endpoints. At some point, things, it starts to not work as well. If you're thinking about building something that large, reach out to us and we can see what we can do. But as long as you're less than about 50 to 100 endpoints, it should be fine. Yes, so Luke's question, the way you search is the Omni box. Dennis, there's definitely commonalities with Google App Engine. I would say the big thing about Dark is that it is optimized for being as quick as possible to build a functional working backend that's actually hosted. That tends to be really useful if you're building an internal tool, or if you want to be able to do something quickly to get it up and prototype and learn from it. We really believe that the faster you can iterate, the more you can learn and the more value you can ship to your users. And yes, you can edit things independently, Luke. I don't know what VCS is, Luis. I'm sorry, but if you tell me what VCS is, I can tell you if we, oh, thank you. Right now, the best way to describe version control in Dark is that you have a full undo redo stack on every single handler. So if I command Z here, you can see it's going back and forth between the numbers that I have typed at various points in time and all of the text. In the future, we do want to give you a better ability to like see sets of changes that happened over time, and that will likely be on top of the feature flag paradigm, where you can have a feature flag that is around your around the changes you're making. yes, we definitely would like more auto layouts. And there are 9 of us who work on this currently. 7 who full-time. Dark itself is written in OCaml and BuckleScript on the front end, which is basically JavaScript OCaml. And then Victoria and I work primarily on writing code within Dark. So all of the packages, all of the documentation. The reason so I guess I would love to figure out how to make this work in other editors too, but one of the challenges we run into is there's so many things that are different from other editors. So like these play buttons aren't really a concept that you would have in an editor that isn't connected to your infrastructure. Or similarly, we didn't get into this. This is the error rail. This is a way to have the benefit of typing without having to worry about handling every error case as it happens. So you can see here, I just get the response. If I were to take this off the error rail, I would then get a response that is okay. And then I could be able to like, see, results. And then I can match results. Okay, results, yay. Or I can just do result. And then error, result, error, frowny face. As you can see here, actually, you can also see the fade out thing where the case that ran is the okay result, but now I've actually been able to handle the errors myself. And so things like that, we don't really know how we could get the same benefit of those features while just like adding a plugin on top of another editor. I'm trying to get the chat box back. There we go. Yeah, so the error rail is basically a path. It's based on a concept called railway-oriented programming, which if you're into like theory is pretty interesting. And it says that when you're writing something the first time, like I was doing, you just really want to know if it works, and then you just want to write the like good case of like, okay, I posted this API, here's the result I got back, it's working. At some point, you want to have the error handling logic for, oh, I got an error back from the external API. And so the error rail lets you not have to write that the first time through. So you can just write it very quickly and then come back and add the error handling after the fact. And it shows you all of the functions that do that. David, yes, they do change instantly in prod today. Yes, the idea is that we want to be able to lock things automatically once they're getting production traffic. It doesn't do that today. It's actually been very interesting. Most people will end up, depending on how much traffic they have, a lot of people do end up just editing directly in prod. It is not yet possible to download a text file to contain your code as backup just because of how it's structured. You can copy paste it out if you want to. I end up taking a lot of screenshots. I'm sorry, I'm having a very bad day for acronyms. I'm going to assume SCM based on ECS is source code management. So you can not currently commit it somewhere else. It just all lives within your canvas and you have that full undo redo. There will be feature things, again, very similar to the feature flags that allow you to like have places where you're saving things. I'm also bad at acronyms. There are also not yet some form of tags to be able to go back to specific things. We're definitely, we're hitting the edge of what is there today. So I'd say today, the best Dark experience you're going to have is building something the first time, having it up, having it just work. So these pretty much the fastest you can go to like working CRUD application that's actually hosted on the internet. And it's really effective for services like that. But as you start to build things that are bigger, we are pushing the boundaries of what Dark is capable of as our users start to hit them. A big, yeah, so the Dark infrastructure itself is all hosted on GCP. It's pretty boring under the hood. I'm not the person to tell you all of the details of what it is under the hood, but it is, so it's probably just all of the choices all of you would make if you were setting up your own. The data source Postgres. don't know if there used to be documentation on under the hood for those who are curious. I think it may have gotten cut at some point. I'm happy to share more of the under the hood documentation. I can add that to the list of things that we'll write documents for. It's also totally fair game to ask in the Slack. Yep. So since everything is REST, if you want to talk to an external database, you can. We have a fair number of users who say had something that's running on Mongo, and Mongo Labs has a pretty nice API for that. So people just talk directly there. Basically anything you can wrap a REST API around, you can talk to from Dark like that. You don't get some of the advantages like using some of the data store features within the language or being able to see those references, but you're able to do it. And to the scale thing, similarly, we are pretty responsive to it. So we have a bunch of obviously monitoring in place, and we talk to our users as they grow and scale. Much like we say 50 API endpoints, we also say like, if you're going to have more than 50 requests per second, please tell us. It doesn't mean you can't do it. We just prefer to know so we understand what's going on. And Dark is, the Dark UI is created in BuckleScript, which actually, it was originally in Elm. And then I don't know if anyone was keeping up on the Elm drama yesterday, but then when Elm upgraded from 0.18 to 0.19, they removed the ability to use native JavaScript. And that really broke a lot of the stuff we were doing. And so Paul wrote a compiler to move us from Elm to BuckleScript. And I think we probably would have chosen BuckleScript in the beginning when we started writing Dark, but it was 3 years ago now, and BuckleScript wasn't really that far along. And so at that point, Elm seemed like the better call for us. There will definitely be a free tier. Right now, while we're in private beta, everything is currently free. The idea is that there will be still that generous free tier, and then after that, it will be based on the infrastructure cost for individual developers. So basically, how much traffic, how much storage, and how much compute are you using? We're not looking to make this unreasonable for people. We want people to be able to run their applications in Dark. We want people to be able to code with live values and actual data. And we should probably have a podcast, but Paul already has a podcast. So Paul hosts a podcast called To Be Continuous with Edith from Launch Darkly. And they talk a lot about continuous delivery and more things like this. They interview a lot of great people, actually. I would really recommend their podcast if you haven't listened to it before. We also are guests on people's podcasts a lot. I really enjoyed the episode we did on Software Engineering Daily. And then there's also an episode that's, I think, 2.5 hours long. That's a lot more about the philosophy and how we've been building Dark over the last 3 years on the Future of Coding podcast with Steve Krause. We do own t-shirts. I think right now it's a little challenging to mail them out, but if anyone who came to the webinar is interested in a t-shirt, if you send us a message, when things calm down and we can go to the post office again, we can send you a t-shirt. The Future of Coding is also a community that's pretty cool. They have a Slack. They have a podcast, they have a Slack community. They talk, if you're interested in Dark because of the philosophy behind it, if you're also following Eve or like that Brett Victor's work or anything like that, and you want to talk about the future of how these tools work, this is definitely a great community. You're also welcome to ask about it in our Slack community. We're both happy to talk about very pragmatic, like how do I deploy my static assets? And we're also happy to talk about why does this work the way it works? That's what we do a lot internally. Thank you. Okay, if we don't have any more questions about SPAs, I'm going to wrap us up for now, but we're always in the Slack. There's a link in the Slack if you want to pair one-on-one on something. That just goes to me. I'm always available, happy to help however we can. If you have feature requests, that's great. You can actually, if you want to make requests for suggestions, go right ahead. I don't think anyone has, but if there's like other videos you would like to see, happy to do this anytime. I'm in the Pacific time zone. There's a link in the Slack that will schedule it. that only schedules while I'm awake. And I will also put all of this information in the Slack, yes. Victoria also added the link here too. Yep, and the samples are, that's where all the samples live. We're working on getting better documentation of this because it's just this annoying flat list. But you can see a bunch of cool stuff in there. Bye, everybody.